We arrived at the nature preserve just as the sun was starting to rise, casting a faint orange glow across the empty parking lot. The air was still, but there was a crispness to it, the kind that made your skin tingle when you stepped out of the car. The day promised to be clear and beautiful, perfect for the hike we had planned. My friend, Dave, and I were the first ones there, the parking lot entirely empty except for our car. We'd heard about the Indian mounds up at the top of the hill, and we'd been looking forward to checking it out for a while. The place wasn't well known, so we figured we'd have it to ourselves. We waited for a while, pacing back and forth as we watched the sun rise higher in the sky. The gate to the trailhead was locked, and we needed the ranger to unlock it. The lot was quiet, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the trees surrounding us. We weren't in any rush, so we stood there, enjoying the peace. After about 15 minutes, a red pickup truck pulled into the lot. A middle-aged man in a ranger uniform got out, unlocking the gate with a set of keys. He gave us a brief wave, nodding his head as he moved toward the kiosk near the trailhead. We took that as our cue and started walking toward the trail. Dave, who was always the more adventurous one, was practically bouncing with excitement, but I felt a strange sensation in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't fear exactly, just an odd feeling, as if something wasn't quite right, but I brushed it off. We were in a nature preserve. Nothing could go wrong. The trail started off wide and flat, cutting through the woods. The trees were tall and dense, but sunlight filtered through the leaves in streaks, illuminating patches of the earth below. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, and for a few minutes it felt like we had the whole world to ourselves. We made small talk, chatting about work and life, the kind of conversation that you have when you're with a friend and there's nothing else to do but walk. The hill in front of us was long and gradual, but it stretched out far enough that we couldn't see the top from where we stood. The Indian mounds were supposed to be up there, remnants of some ancient civilization that had used the land for burial sites and rituals. It was supposed to be a peaceful spot, but for some reason, there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't shake. Something in the air that made the back of my neck prickle. As we walked, we spotted her. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was walking down the trail, coming toward us. She had a confident stride, but something about her stood out. She was dressed all wrong for a hike. She was wearing a black dress and a pair of high heels, the kind that you'd expect to see in a city, not on a trail. She had a large, leather purse slung over her shoulder, and her hair was styled in a way that suggested she'd spent time getting ready that morning, not rushing out to enjoy nature. My first thought was that she must have been lost, maybe out for a walk and stumbled onto the trail by mistake. We slowed down as she approached, stepping off the path to let her pass. But instead of walking by without a word, she stopped in front of us, looking a little unsure. There was something in her expression, a kind of nervous energy, that made me uncomfortable. "Hey, we're heading up to the Indian mounds," I said. "What's it like up there? Is it worth the hike?" Her eyes flickered nervously. She glanced back down the trail, her gaze darting to the trees behind her as if something was watching her. She looked back at us, but her voice sounded shaky when she replied. "It's creepy up there," she said, almost under her breath. "I wouldn't go if I were you." Her words hung in the air between us for a second, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what it was, but something about her tone, the way she said it, made it sound like more than just a casual warning. There was an edge to her voice, like she had seen something up there that had shaken her. We nodded politely, not wanting to press the issue. Dave, who was always more skeptical than me, shrugged and said something along the lines of, "Well, it can't be that bad." He was trying to shake off the strange feeling, but I wasn't so sure. Still, we continued on, walking up the trail in silence for a few moments. As we moved up the hill, I kept glancing back, my eyes lingering on the woman as she continued down the trail. She hadn't gone far, maybe just a few feet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way she was dressed, her demeanor, it didn't fit with the surroundings. We were in the middle of a nature preserve, miles from the nearest town, and here she was, walking down the trail like she was on her way to work. It didn't make sense. Then it hit me. We hadn't heard her come up behind us. We'd been standing still for a while, and when we looked up, she was there, suddenly walking down toward us. That wasn't normal. People don't just appear on a trail like that. We continued walking, but now my mind was racing. I kept stealing glances back, watching for her. But something was off. She wasn't there anymore. I stopped and turned around, squinting down the trail. There was no sign of her. No heels clicking on the dirt, no rustling of leaves. Nothing. She was just gone. I looked to Dave, but he was already frowning, his brow furrowed as he looked back down the hill, just like I was. We both scanned the path, but there was no sign of her anywhere. I don't know what it was, but at that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The trail was straight, open, and clear. There were no side paths or any place she could have hidden. It was impossible for her to have disappeared so quickly, especially in a place like this where the terrain was thick and rugged. We hadn't heard any movement or seen any sign of her veering off the trail. Dave glanced at me, his face pale. "She shouldn't have been here," he said, his voice low, almost like he was speaking to himself. "Yeah, I know," I replied. I didn't want to voice the thoughts that were creeping into my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the way she'd dressed or the warning she'd given us. It was the way she had appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. We stood there for a moment, both of us staring down the trail. I don't know why, but I felt a deep, unsettling sense that we weren't alone anymore. It was as if the entire forest had gone silent, and the world was holding its breath. Without a word, we turned and continued up the trail, though the air felt heavier now, like something was watching us. The trees seemed to close in, their shadows stretching longer across the path. Every rustle, every snap of a twig felt amplified, like the forest was full of eyes, all fixed on us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that woman reappear, but she never did. The further we went, the more I felt like we were walking into something we didn't understand. The Indian mounds were supposed to be a place of history, of ancient culture, but in that moment, they felt like something else entirely. The land itself seemed to hold secrets, and I was starting to wonder if we were meant to uncover them, or if we were just trespassing on something we weren't supposed to find. By the time we reached the top of the hill, the unease hadn't gone away. We stood there for a few moments, taking in the view. The mounds were spread out before us, their shapes rising gently from the earth. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something had changed. We weren't alone. We didn't talk much on the way back down. The trail, which had once seemed so inviting, now felt different, darker, somehow. When we reached the parking lot, we were the only ones there again. The ranger's truck was gone, and the lot felt even emptier than it had before. We didn't mention the woman again, not until we were well out of the preserve. But we both knew something about her had felt wrong. Maybe it was the way she had vanished, or the strange warning she'd given us. Maybe it was just the feeling that something in that place had been waiting for us. Whatever it was, we didn't go back to that trail. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the crunch of footsteps behind me. But when I turn around, there's never anyone there. The air was cold as I laced up my boots, the kind of cold that makes your fingers tingle and your breath visible in small puffs. It was spring, but still early enough in the season for the mornings to start out freezing. Paradise Valley north of Yellowstone was a place I had been to before, but this time it was just me and my dog. She was an energetic mix of Border Collie and Australian Shepherd, and I had been taking her on hikes since she was a puppy. She was used to the wild, but this trip was different from any I'd done before. My plan was simple: hike a 6-mile out-and-back trail that wound its way up a canyon to a waterfall. It wasn't a difficult hike, but it was remote enough that I'd never seen another soul on the trail during previous trips. It felt like a good spot to get away from the world for a while, especially with the snow on the mountains and the peaceful, untouched landscape. The trailhead was quiet when we arrived, not a car in sight. It was just me and my dog. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the crunch of snow underfoot as we started down the narrow path that would take us up to the waterfall. The first mile or so felt like something out of a picture book, with snow dusting the ground, the tall pines framing the sky, and the occasional bird call echoing through the canyon. My dog, her tail wagging, was happily sniffing everything in sight, like she always did. But then something started to feel off. It wasn't anything I could point to immediately, just a subtle shift in the air, an unease that I couldn't quite shake. My dog started acting strange about 2 miles into the hike. At first, it was just a few quick glances around, as if she was checking something out. But then she started to behave more erratically, darting off the trail to hide in the brush or crouching low to the ground, as though trying to avoid something. Her head moved back and forth constantly, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. It wasn't the usual playful behavior I'd seen in her before. At first, I thought maybe she had just gotten too cold. The temperature had dropped suddenly from around 30 degrees to a bitter 15, and the clouds had started to roll in, thickening the sky. I'd been out in the wild enough to know that storms could hit fast in this part of the world, and I figured that the change in weather could have made her anxious. The wind had picked up too, whipping through the trees with a sharp bite. But then I noticed something else. My dog's movements became more frantic. She darted from one bush to the next, hiding herself behind rocks, as if she were trying to find cover. She was twitchy, nervous, constantly checking the tree line with that wide-eyed, hyper-alert look I had never seen her exhibit before. I called her name a few times, but she only half listened, as though something else had her full attention. This wasn't normal. She was usually pretty good about staying close, and her erratic behavior was making me feel uneasy. It wasn't just her. As I looked around, I realized how quiet everything had become. There was no chirping from birds anymore, no sound of animals moving through the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to die down for a moment. The only noise now was the faint crunch of snow beneath my boots and the rustling of dry leaves caught in the occasional breeze. I stood still for a moment, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. My dog was still acting out of character. She was definitely spooked, and when I looked around, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The place was still too still. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt wrong. Maybe it was the storm rolling in. Maybe it was the drop in temperature. But I couldn't ignore the fact that something was making my dog act like this. I decided to turn back, figuring that if the storm was coming, it was better to head back to the car than press on and risk getting stuck in bad weather. It wasn't easy. The further we went back, the more my dog's behavior escalated. She started to dart between trees and bushes, her movements sharp and frantic, like she was trying to escape something. She wouldn't stop twitching her nose, sniffing the air, eyes constantly moving back and forth. I couldn't understand why she was acting this way, but I started to feel like there was something else out there with us. The feeling grew stronger the closer we got to the parking lot. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking just out of sight, but I saw nothing. I tried to push the thought from my mind, but I couldn't shake it. We were maybe a quarter of a mile from the trailhead when I spotted 2 men up ahead, unloading camera gear from a truck parked near the trailhead. They were setting up big telephoto lenses and tripods, clearly prepared for something. As I approached, one of them looked up and waved at me. He had the kind of rugged outdoorsy look you'd expect from someone who spent a lot of time in the backcountry. I nodded and gave him a small wave back, but when he saw my dog, his expression shifted, like he was suddenly more interested in what was going on. "Have you seen any evidence of wolves around here?" he asked, his voice deep and low. "We heard one of the packs moved into this canyon last night." I felt my heart skip a beat. Wolves? It didn't make sense. My dog had been acting like there was something dangerous nearby, but I hadn't heard anything about wolves. The idea of a pack being so close made my stomach churn. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my mind was racing. "No," I said, but my dog was acting really strange. She was on edge the whole time. The man looked thoughtful, glancing at my dog, who was still skittish and looking around nervously. "Yeah, it's possible. A lot of times they'll travel just outside of sight range. They move quietly and can keep a low profile, but dogs seem to pick up on them." That's probably what she was reacting to. I nodded, trying to process what he was saying. It made sense, but the realization sent a chill down my spine. Wolves. Pack. Just outside of sight, staying hidden in the trees. My dog had been on edge because she could sense them before I ever knew they were there. I didn't stick around much longer after that. The men were busy setting up their cameras, and I felt like I needed to get out of there. I didn't say anything else before I turned to head to my car. The thought of wolves watching us from the trees, just out of sight, made my skin crawl. The ride home was quiet, and the air in the car felt colder than it had when I first started the hike. I couldn't stop thinking about the trail, about the eerie silence that had fallen over the canyon, and about the way my dog had reacted. It was like she knew something was out there, something dangerous, something that I couldn't even see. A few days later, I ran into a regular customer at work, a professor who studied large predators. He was one of those people who always seemed to know everything about the wilderness, and I'd had some interesting conversations with him before. I told him about the hike, about how my dog had acted, and about the two men at the parking lot asking about wolves. When I finished, he gave me a knowing look. "It sounds like a pack was paralleling you," he said. "Wolves are good at staying out of sight, but your dog probably picked up on their presence. They'll often follow a hiker's trail, especially if they're moving through familiar territory." I nodded, trying to wrap my head around it. My dog had reacted to something I couldn't even see, and now it made sense. The wolves had been watching us the whole time, staying just out of sight, and my dog had been the only one who knew they were there. It was a sobering thought. The wilderness is full of dangers that we can't always understand, but the animals that live there have an instinct for survival that we can't match. My dog had sensed the wolves before I had, and I was lucky to have turned back when I did. I wouldn't have known what to do if I had encountered them head-on, and it was a reminder of how quickly the balance of safety and danger can tip in the wild. As I thought back on that day, I realized that the quiet feeling in the air, the strange stillness that had come over the canyon, wasn't just the storm rolling in. It had been something more, something that had been watching us the entire time. I knew now that there was always more to the wilderness than meets the eye, and sometimes it's best to listen to the instincts of the animals who call it home. They know more than we ever could. It was a cool evening, and the kind of crisp night air that makes you feel a little more alive, like a reminder that nature is always there, just waiting for us to pay attention. My Great Pyrenees and I had been hiking on this same trail countless times. It was a 5-mile loop in a semi-urban area, familiar territory where we often encountered a mix of wildlife, deer, rabbits, the occasional fox, nothing that ever really put us on edge. But tonight, something felt different. Normally, on a trail like this, the sight of deer darting out in front of us doesn't faze either of us. She's used to it. In fact, she usually picks up the scent of them before I even see them, tail wagging, nose working overtime. It's something I've always admired about her, how in tune she is with everything around us. But tonight it was different. We were about a mile into the hike, the sun long gone, the dimming light turning into a blanket of stars overhead. I kept a steady pace, listening to the crunch of gravel and leaves underfoot. The dog was ahead of me, as usual, her fluffy white coat glowing faintly in the low light. I looked over at her, and that's when I noticed something odd. She wasn't as eager as usual. Her ears, normally perked up, were flattened slightly, and her head was low, almost sniffing the ground. Her tail, typically held high in a proud arc, was now hanging limp behind her. I slowed down, taking a few steps to catch up with her. "What's up, girl?" I muttered under my breath. She didn't respond. I knew she was working something out in her mind, and I wasn't sure what it was, but she was definitely picking up on something. A few yards ahead of us, a deer burst out of the trees, its movements quick and graceful. It stopped, staring at us for a split second before dashing off into the underbrush. Normally, the sight of a deer would have sent my dog into a frenzy. She would have pulled on the leash, ears up, body tense, ready to chase. But tonight, she just stood there, nose in the air, still and silent. No chase, no excitement. That was the first real sign that something wasn't right. I paused and scanned the woods around us, my senses alert, but there was nothing, just the rustling of trees and the distant hum of city lights. I called her name softly, Nova. She looked up at me then, her big brown eyes wide, but there was something in them, a flicker of unease, almost like she was trying to tell me something without words. Her body language was more than enough to set off a warning bell in my mind. I adjusted the grip on the leash and began to move a little slower, watching her carefully. She wasn't pulling me forward like she usually did. In fact, she was becoming increasingly erratic, her nose twitching, her body lowering lower to the ground as if she was about to pounce. I had never seen her act like this before. She wasn't just tracking the scent of something. She was on edge, and I could feel it in the air, too. The tension in the woods was palpable, thick in the silence. Then I heard it, a faint sound in the underbrush, a rustle, something moving just out of sight. I froze and stood still, straining my ears to catch any hint of danger. Nova's head snapped in the direction of the sound, her entire body coiled with energy. Her low growl, deep in her chest, was unlike anything I'd ever heard from her. It wasn't a playful growl or a bark at a squirrel. This was something primal. She was on alert, and whatever she was sensing, it wasn't good. I stood there, heart racing, watching her. The rustling sound came again, closer this time. I could just make out a shadow moving among the trees, but it was still too dark to make out what it was. The air felt thicker now, heavier. The small animals, usually darting around in the undergrowth, had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Nova's growl deepened, and I felt her body tense beneath me, every muscle tight with anticipation. I could almost hear her thoughts. Whatever she was tracking, it was dangerous. Without warning, she dropped into a pre-pounce stance, her belly close to the ground, her eyes locked on something ahead. I could hear it now, 2 soft footfalls crunching through the leaves, coming closer, moving fast. Something was closing in on us. I reached for the small .25 auto tucked into my waistband, not out of fear but out of necessity. I wasn't sure what was out there, but I was ready for whatever came next. It wasn't until I looked up that I saw them. 3 coyotes, their eyes glinting in the dim light, stalking us from the edge of the trail. They were close, maybe 30 meters away, circling us in a way that didn't seem right. They weren't just passing through. They were watching us, observing, and they weren't scared. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew coyotes weren't generally a direct threat to humans, but there was something about this situation that felt wrong. They weren't acting like the typical coyotes I'd seen before. These were bold, aggressive even. Nova, as if on cue, bared her teeth and let out a low, blood-curdling growl that seemed to shake the ground beneath us. Her stance was that of a protector, a dog born to defend. I could see the muscles in her body flexing, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. She was no longer the playful, loving lap dog I knew. She had transformed into something else, something fierce and ruthless, as if she were born for this. I took a step back, slowly watching the coyotes. They didn't flinch. They just stared, sizing us up, like they were deciding if we were worth the effort. I had to think fast. The last thing I wanted was for a confrontation to break out. But at the same time, I knew that Nova wasn't about to let them get any closer. I tugged gently on her leash, trying to pull her back, but she wasn't having it. She stayed low, muscles rippling with tension, eyes locked on the coyotes. The growl in her chest grew louder, more intense, as she slowly began to creep forward, keeping her body low to the ground. The coyotes didn't move, but I could see their bodies shift slightly, as if preparing for a strike. It was a standoff now, just the coyotes and us, the night air heavy with the weight of it. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me, my heart pounding in my ears. I knew my dog was ready. She had the instincts of a born protector, and there was no way she was going to let anything happen to me. But I also knew that if this went wrong, if the coyotes attacked, things could get ugly fast. Then something changed. One of the coyotes, the largest of the 3, took a step forward, and that was all it took. Nova exploded into action. With a speed and force that took me by surprise, she lunged forward, her body a blur of white fur and power. The coyotes yelped in surprise and scattered, bolting in different directions. Nova didn't hesitate for a second. She chased after them, her growl still rumbling in her throat, pushing the pack back into the woods. I could hear her barking, the sound of her paws thudding against the earth as she pursued them. But I could also hear the coyotes retreating, no longer interested in the fight. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second, I just stood there, watching as my dog ran the coyotes off. It wasn't until she returned, panting heavily but proud, that I felt the tension leave my body. She trotted back to me, tail high, her eyes still sharp, alert. She was on guard, but the threat was gone. I could hardly believe what had just happened. In a matter of seconds, my dog had gone from playful companion to fierce protector, facing down a pack of wild animals without hesitation. I had always known that Great Pyrenees were born to protect, but witnessing it firsthand like this, it hit differently. I had a new respect for her, one I hadn't truly understood before. As we walked back down the trail, I kept her close to me, her body still tense but more relaxed now that the danger had passed. We didn't encounter any more wildlife that night. The forest around us had returned to its quiet, peaceful state, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But as I glanced down at my dog, I couldn't help but smile. Nova had done what she was born to do, and I was lucky to have her by my side. That night, when we got home, I gave her a long, slow pet along her back, the kind she liked best. She nuzzled my hand, her eyes soft and affectionate again. As I looked down at her, I realized that the bond between us had grown stronger in ways I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a dog. She was a protector, a loyal companion, and now, I knew without a doubt, she would always have my back, no matter what came our way. This happened last June. My friend and I planned a weekend overnight in the Catskills, just a short getaway. She brought her dog along, a big black lab mix who was usually more bark than bite, but he made us feel safer out in the woods. We each had our own tents and carried bear canisters for food and toiletries. We were trying to do things by the book. Leave no trace, store food far from camp, stay safe. You know, all the things that are supposed to make the woods a little less wild and a little more manageable. We started our hike around mid-morning. The trail was dry, the sky clear. We didn't talk much on the way in, just enjoyed the rhythm of hiking, the soft thud of boots on dirt, the occasional clink of gear. We saw a few other hikers, nothing out of the ordinary, mostly couples, a few solo people. Everyone seemed friendly, normal. It was one of those trails that felt used but not crowded. You'd go 20, 30 minutes without seeing anyone, then suddenly pass someone and nod hello. By late afternoon, we found a decent spot to pitch camp, about 100 feet or so off the trail. It was tucked back enough for some privacy, but not so far that it felt isolated. We set up a small camp, tents about 20 feet apart, a little area with logs for sitting, and the bear canisters stashed maybe 60 or 70 yards into the trees, far enough from the tents that nothing would be drawn toward us if something got interested. After we ate dinner, we sat around for a while. The sun dipped behind the ridge, the air got cooler. My friend's dog lay quietly, ears twitching every now and then at some sound in the brush. There was a stillness that came over the woods around 9 p.m., like someone had hit a mute button. No breeze, no crickets, just heavy silence. It wasn't necessarily creepy at that point, just very, very quiet. A kind of quiet you only notice when you realize how rare it is. Eventually, we turned in. My friend zipped into her tent with her dog, and I crawled into mine. I remember feeling warm and calm at first. I had a decent sleeping pad, a summer bag, and I'd been looking forward to just lying still after a long day on the trail. I must have fallen asleep sometime around 10 or so. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. The forest was still dead silent. But then I heard movement, something soft, slow, moving through the trees. Not the crash of a bear or the quick steps of a deer. It sounded deliberate. One step, then a pause. Another step, then silence. Then another step. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out a shape or any kind of clear direction, but close enough that I could tell it wasn't my imagination. I held my breath, tried not to move. My heart was pounding. After a few moments, I heard a distinct sound, metal on plastic, a rattling sound, dull but sharp, that unmistakable clatter of something knocking against a bare canister. That was enough to wake me up fully. I lay there, eyes open in the pitch dark, listening. It didn't go on long, just a few seconds. Then it stopped completely. No rustling, no footfalls, nothing, just stillness again. I didn't fall asleep for the rest of the night. I lay in my bag, too scared to get up, trying not to let my mind wander into worst-case scenarios. Every small creak of a tree or shuffle of wind made me tense up. At one point, I thought I heard a soft growl in the distance, but it was hard to tell if it was real or just in my head. My friend's dog barked once, quick and low, but didn't keep going, and everything went silent again after that. When the sky finally started turning gray, I unzipped my tent and stepped out. The woods were cold, damp with morning dew. My friend was already up, looking groggy but alert. Her dog was sitting upright, tail stiff, watching the trees. We talked briefly, both of us trying to act normal, but it was clear we were shaken. She said her dog had growled during the night, low and constant, like he was watching something outside the tent. She'd also heard the same footsteps and rattling. We both agreed it had to be something near the canisters, so we went to check. Her canister was about where we'd left it, tipped onto its side, but otherwise untouched. Mine was gone, just gone. We stood there for a minute, unsure of what to think. The ground around where mine had been was undisturbed. No claw marks, no crushed ferns, no obvious path of something dragging it away. It looked like someone had just walked off with it. I started searching the area, thinking maybe it rolled downhill or got knocked under a bush, but there was nothing. I made wider and wider circles, looking under logs, behind trees. Still nothing. It was like it vanished. That's when I started to consider the idea that it might have been a person. The thought of someone creeping into camp in the middle of the night, stealing my bare canister of all things, made my skin crawl. Seemed insane. Who would even want it? All it had in it was some food, toothpaste, and sunscreen. Not exactly treasure. But as I kept circling through the woods, it started to feel more likely. A bear or raccoon would have made a mess. There'd be signs, noise, disruption, but this felt clean, intentional. We packed up shortly after. Neither of us really wanted to stay a second night. My food was gone anyway, and we both felt uneasy. As we hiked out, we ran into a man who stopped us on the trail. He looked tired and panicked, and he asked if we'd seen a woman trail running alone, his wife. He said she left that morning and hadn't come back when expected. It wasn't alarming yet, but it was enough to add to the weird feeling we already had. We told him no, we hadn't seen anyone, and he thanked us before moving on. A few miles later, we noticed another hiker. He had passed us earlier in the day, heading the same direction we were. We'd watched him go ahead and disappear over a ridge. But now he was behind us again, somehow. We hadn't stopped long enough for him to have gone all the way ahead and then looped back. It didn't make sense. He wasn't carrying much, just a small pack. He didn't say anything, just nodded and kept going. But it stuck with me. The rest of the hike out was quiet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to pop out of the trees. My friend was quiet too. Her dog kept close to her, tail down. We made it back to the parking lot by early evening. There were a few other cars, but it wasn't crowded. The man looking for his wife was still there, pacing around, talking to someone on a phone. I didn't go near him. I just wanted to get in the car and leave. On the drive home, I kept running everything through my head. The noise, the missing canister, the man looking for his wife, the hiker who appeared behind us. Any one of those things on their own would have been strange, but not necessarily alarming. Together, though, they painted a picture I didn't like. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been watched, that someone had been out there with us, close enough to approach in the dark and take something without making a sound. I checked online later to see if there were any updates about the missing woman. I didn't find anything. No news articles, no posts. It made me wonder if maybe it wasn't serious, or if maybe it had been resolved quietly. But part of me also worried that maybe something bad had happened, and it just hadn't made the news. As for my bear canister, it was never found. I contacted park services, just in case someone turned it in. I never heard back. Looking back on it now, I'm convinced it was taken by a person. Animals don't move like that. They don't walk carefully, pause after every step. They don't remove a canister without disturbing the ground around it. And if it had been a person, they would have had to know where it was stashed. They would have had to watch us place it there. That's what bothers me the most. The idea that someone might have been out there watching us set up camp, waiting for nightfall. Since then, I've been more cautious on the trail. I still go out, I always will, but I'm more deliberate now. I don't camp near obvious trail spots. I stash food even farther. I keep a light on at night, and I don't assume I'm alone, even when it feels like it. That trip in the Catskills wasn't the scariest in a flashy way. There were no growling bears or sprinting shadows, but it got under my skin in a way that no other trip has, because it felt like someone was out there, not just wandering, but watching, waiting, and I don't know what they wanted. I had been planning this trip into North Paria Canyon for a while. It's one of those places that feels like it fell off the edge of the world, carved out of the ancient desert, surrounded by cliffs, dry washes, and the winding Silta Paria River. Winter was perfect for it. Fewer people, no bugs, and cold enough that I wouldn't be sweating every step. I packed light but careful. Plenty of layers, a good sleeping bag, stove, backup water filter, knife, map, and everything else that's kept me alive on trips like this before. The hike in had been hard, not because of elevation or trail conditions, but because of how remote and empty it was. After a few miles, it stopped feeling like a canyon and started feeling like a maze of time-worn rock and dry silence. I hadn't seen another person for 2 days. The last human I'd talked to was a gas station clerk back on Route 89. The trail itself, if you can even call it that, is mostly following the riverbed. The ground gives under your boots, the sand swallowing every step like it's trying to slow you down. 9 miles in, I found the ledge. It was about 600 feet up a steep slope, part switchback slick rock, part loose scramble. The climb up to the ledge took longer than I'd guessed, especially with a full pack, but when I finally got up there, it was worth every ounce of sweat. From where I pitched my tent, I could look down over the winding Paria River and the canyon walls catching the last orange light of the day. Behind me was a much larger cliff, maybe another 800 feet up, and then a wide, flat mesa stretching into the distance. There was no one else up there. No footprints, no signs, just me, the cold air, and the raw silence of winter in the desert. I cooked a simple dinner, instant rice and some packets of tuna. It always tastes better when you're far from home. My breath came out in clouds, and the wind picked up not long after sundown. I'd layered up, though, and my sleeping bag was rated well below freezing. By 8:30, I was already zipped inside it, curled up on my pad, my tent staked down to bare rock and dirt. I remember feeling that good kind of tired, where your legs ache a bit, but your chest feels light and everything's just quiet. No buzzing phones, no traffic, just the desert and stars. I must have drifted off pretty fast, because the next thing I remember was waking up in the pitch black. No dreams, no noises leading up to it, just suddenly awake. I opened my eyes and couldn't see a thing inside the tent. I lay still for a moment, wondering what had pulled me out of sleep. At first I didn't hear anything, then I did. Footsteps, not little scurrying sounds, not the skitter of a rabbit or the hop of a bird or a deer crunching through brush. These were heavy, deliberate, thick, like someone walking directly near me. Thump, thump, thump. It didn't sound like it was right next to the tent, but maybe 30 or 40 feet away. And it didn't stop. I counted at least a dozen heavy steps, one after another. No dragging, no pause, just solid, repetitive impacts. Whatever it was moving with weight. Not slow, not fast, just steady and heavy. I held my breath. In the silence that followed, I realized how much colder the air felt. My breath was loud inside the sleeping bag, and the sound of my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I didn't move a muscle. I told myself it was probably a deer, a big one maybe, or a bighorn sheep passing through. There's plenty of them out here. They wander ledges and can climb almost anywhere. But I've seen those animals move before. They don't sound like this. Deer make light, scuffling steps. Sheep sometimes clatter on rocks. But this was different. There was no sound of hooves, no click of rock, just solid, padded thumps, like a large person walking with purpose. Then it screamed. The sound ripped through the canyon like something out of a nightmare. It wasn't just loud, it was close. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was like a woman's scream, but deeper, harsher, full of rage and panic and something ancient. It echoed off the cliffs behind me, bounced down into the canyon below, and kept going. It was absolutely directed at me. I sat up fast, nearly tangling myself in the sleeping bag, and grabbed the knife I always keep just inside the tent pocket. My hand was shaking. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell. My voice was stuck in my throat. All I could think was, what the hell is that? What the hell is that? What the hell is that? And then nothing. The scream stopped as suddenly as it started. The footsteps didn't return. No more thumping. No more sound at all. Just silence. Real silence. Not city silence. Not even wilderness quiet. This was the dead stillness you only feel when the air itself is holding its breath. I couldn't hear the wind. I couldn't hear the river below. I just sat there, knife gripped tight, eyes wide open in the dark, ears straining for even the smallest sound. My chest was pounding so hard it hurt. Every muscle in my body was tense. I didn't even want to unzip the tent. I didn't want to make any noise. Something had screamed at me, not near me, at me. I don't know how long I sat like that. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Time stopped meaning anything. I tried to rationalize it. A mountain lion. That made the most sense. I'd heard of them screaming before. People say it can sound like a woman screaming. I'd never heard one in person until then. But if it was a lion, why the heavy footsteps? Why so loud? Why would it scream like that and then disappear? Was it already stalking me? Had it been watching me from above the ledge? Did it think I was some kind of threat or intruder? Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, I laid back down. I didn't put the knife away. I didn't unzip the bag. I just kept it clutched in one hand and stared into the roof of the tent. Sleep didn't come. Not for hours. I lay there, every sense alert, every sound magnified. My own breathing sounded like wind through a tunnel. Every time the tent fabric shifted with a breeze, my body tensed. Every rustle, every creak of my sleeping pad, every tiny sound was a fresh wave of adrenaline. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it, if the sound had been a dream. But no, I knew I'd been awake. I was aware. I remembered. It wasn't a dream. I don't know when I finally passed out, but I did. The next thing I remember was waking up again to the pale light of dawn. My body was stiff and cold, my mouth dry, my hands sore from gripping the knife. I sat up and looked around. Everything was still. The tent was intact. My pack was untouched. There were no drag marks, no disturbed rocks, no blood, no claw marks. I stepped out slowly, boots on, knife still in hand, and scanned the ledge. I didn't see anything. I hiked out along the edge of the cliff about 20 or 30 feet from the tent, and that's when I saw them. Tracks. Not many. Maybe 5 or 6. Big, round impressions in the sandy soil just beyond the patch of harder rock where my tent was staked. They weren't human. They were wide and soft-edged. I couldn't make out claws clearly, but they were too large to be a coyote or bobcat. And they weren't hooves. They were padded, cat-like, mountain lion. The prints were spaced wide, and the pattern matched the pacing I'd heard the night before. Thump, thump, thump. The animal must have come from the mesa above, walked right near my tent, and screamed, probably as a warning. Maybe I startled it. Maybe my sleeping pad shifted just as it passed, and it thought I was waking up or moving. I had no food out, no smells to attract it, But I was there in its path and it wanted me to know. I didn't hang around much longer. I packed up fast, barely even boiled water for tea. I didn't eat until I was halfway down the slope and closer to the river. Every few minutes, I'd stop and look behind me, listening for that sound again. But it never came. The air was calm. The canyon felt different, emptier maybe, but the threat felt like it had passed. I hiked the entire 9 miles back out that day, no breaks, just steady walking. My legs were sore by the time I reached the trailhead, and I could barely get my boots off at the car. I sat there for a long time just staring out at the desert and the sun creeping up over the cliffs, my hands still shaking. Later, I talked to someone who'd spent time out there, a ranger, I think, or maybe another hiker. When I told them what happened, they didn't laugh. They nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, that's a lion. They come down to the river sometimes to drink, especially in winter when snow is scarce and water up top is frozen. If you're between them and the water, sometimes they'll scream. Not always, but it happens. It's rare, but not unheard of. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't something unexplainable, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. I'd been out in the wild hundreds of times before. I'd slept with bears nearby, hiked through wolf country, woken to deer snorting in the night. But this was different. There's something about being alone on a ledge hundreds of feet above a canyon, miles from the nearest human being, and hearing that sound.